If you are just joining us for the first time online or in person here, you found yourself walking into Oakland's Bible Chapel. Bible is our middle name here, so if you've got yours, I would invite you to get it out. And we're going to be looking at God's Word today. If you don't have one, just head out to the lobby there and pick up one of ours, and you can use it and take it home with you if you want. We are going to be in the book of Daniel again. This is our second week in our study of Daniel. Oh, sorry, losing my voice a bit today. Somebody might ask, why Daniel? And we went over this a bit last week, but Daniel is really a critical book in the story of God's people from the Old Testament. We had a whole series back in the winter and the spring called What's the Story, where we went through the Old Testament, mostly understanding what's going on. And even though this book was written 2,600 years ago, and it's from a bunch of people on the other side of the world, the things that are written in this particular book and the lessons we can learn from the time that Daniel was living in, I think you'll find are remarkably similar to our place and our time. I think we can learn a lot from what Daniel writes here. I think we'll find the words of this book are very appropriate and applicable to our time and our place in 2020 Victoria, Canada, and wherever anybody finds themselves in this day and age. Now, so far, I want to just kind of set the stage. Why is Daniel so critical? Well, he stands at kind of a crossroads, a momentous mountain peak in the story. And a thousand years before Daniel, God called this guy named Abraham from the place where, funnily enough, where Daniel is living now. And he says, Abraham, I'm going to make you a great nation. I'm going to give you some offspring. I'm going to create a nation out of your family. And God is true to his word, and he promises him that, and he promises him this too. I'm going to take that nation, and I'm going to give them a land of their own to live in, and they're going to be my nation. And so everything happens. Abraham's grandson, Jacob, ends up in Egypt, escaping a famine. Him and his large family, about 70 people, moved to Egypt. And they stay there for over 400 years. And by the end of the 400 years, there are a very large group of people, probably well over 1 million people, but they're enslaved. And at that point in time, there's this guy named Moses, who God calls, and he says, Moses, you're going to go and you're going to get my people from Israel, and you're going to take them to the land that I had promised to my friend Abraham. And I'm going to fulfill my promise to him and deliver his family out of slavery and into the land. And so Moses does that. He goes to Egypt and he leads this great group of people out, and great stories, and miracles and plagues and the Red Sea parting and manna from heaven and all kinds of crazy stuff there. And again, we always say, if the first verse of the Bible is true, and in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth, why would we ever have a problem with the rest of it? If that's true, God can do anything. And he led these people out to the desert. Now, one thing we got to know, though, is he stopped along the way, right? He stopped at this place called Mount Sinai. And he calls them all up and he goes, okay, here's the deal, everybody. I will do what I said I would do for Abraham. And here's your part. You are to go to this land, and you are to be my representatives to the nations that surround you. You are to be the worshipers of the one true God, and you're going to show all the nations around you who I am and what it means to live under my authority, what it means to live as worshipers of me. You're going to be a light to the nations. That's what's going to happen. But if you don't, you can't stay in the land. That's the deal. So obey, worship me, be a light to the nations, live in the land, fail, and I will remove you from the land. Now, if you've read the Bible, you would know, how does it go? Not great. There's a couple of high points. I mean, David was a pretty good guy, and Joshua and some of the judges, but after the kings come at about 1000 BC, it kind of goes downhill from there. So David's king, and then his son Solomon. After Solomon, it just all falls apart, and there's basically a civil war, and the nation breaks in two, and the 10 northern tribes kind of rebel against the two southern tribes. The northern tribes continued to be known as Israel, and the southern two, Judah and Benjamin, are now the nation of Judah. And what happens is, as we've read last week, there's this guy named Nebuchadnezzar that comes to power in Babylon, and he comes, and shortly after 605 BC, and he surrounds Jerusalem and takes it captive, and he takes a bunch of the people from Jerusalem and brings them to Babylon to turn them into Babylonians, and Daniel is one of those kids that he takes. Daniel was probably about 14 when he was taken to Babylon. So, Daniel begins to live his life in a foreign land, and they're kicked out of the land. Nebuchadnezzar didn't destroy Jerusalem at that time. He did that about 10 years later. He came back again because of the rebellion, just wiped the place out, just flattened it, flattened the temple, flattened the city. And Daniel is wanting the answer. We'll find out later in Daniel as he prays. He was like, God, what are you going to do? Your people have been removed. Is this the end? Are we done? Like, have you abandoned us now? What's going to happen next? Because we know we failed you. We don't have the land anymore. You brought us here, and we failed, and now we're gone. What is going to happen to us, your people? Well, turn to Daniel chapter 3. 739 is the page number in my Bible. It's just right after the big Isaiah, Jeremiah is there, and then Ezekiel, and then Daniel's after Ezekiel. You can find about, 60% of the way through. But Daniel's at a point in time where they're really scared. They don't know. They don't know what's going on. And they want to know what the future plan is. Well, chapter 1 of Daniel is in 605 BC. We know when Nebuchadnezzar came to power. The next date we really know as ordering the book of Daniel is the year 562. That's when Nebuchadnezzar dies. Okay? In between those things, Daniel chapter 1 and 2 and 562, chapter 3 and 4 happen. So that sometime in that 40-year period, this story happens. Okay, sometime just after 597, but before 562 BC. Verse 1 of chapter 3 of Daniel says this: Nebuchadnezzar made an image of gold. Okay, here's the thing. There's lots of things to kind of sort out here. We just want to read what it plainly says. Let's not read anything into this. There's just such an interest in kind of like the end times, the latter days in our day and age. Like, just check out YouTube and Facebook. It's all over the place. Crazy stuff out there. How do we kind of discern the truth of God's word from the theories that men make up? That's what we're doing in the book of Daniel. Let's just read what it plainly says. Verse 1, King Nebuchadnezzar made an image of gold. The statue wasn't necessarily of Nebuchadnezzar. Right? Could have been one of the gods of Babylon. Could have been a tree. We don't know at all what exactly this statue was. It might make sense that it was one of the Babylonian gods, maybe their main god, a guy named Marduk, who would later become known as Bel in the Assyrian Empire. This is kind of funny, Marduk was the god of order and destiny. Doesn't it sound like a competing job description to Daniel's God, Yahweh, who is sovereign over all? The Marduk, Bel, went by another name too in the Semitic area, in the Arab Hebrew region of the world. His name was Baal, or Baal. And you can read in the Old Testament all kinds of stories about the Baal worshipers. Well, it could have been that, but the reality is we just don't know, okay? King Nebuchadnezzar made an image of gold whose height was 60 cubits and his breadth 6 cubits, okay? Most people think this is like 90 feet by 6 feet. There's some speculation as to exactly what a cubit is, but that is. And then some people say, well, it can't be that because you can't have something that's 6 feet wide and 90 feet tall. I don't know if you can or not. I'm not an engineer. But it could have also just included a big platform, which is probably more like it because he would have wanted the statue up high. And there is some evidence of the Babylonians building gigantic platforms. So anyway, the point is it's up high and it's huge and it's gold, and Nebuchadnezzar built it. Okay, verse 1, he set it up on the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. Okay, so the plain of Dura, again, nobody really knows for sure what the intended meaning of this exact place is. Because here's the thing, I'm from Ontario originally, okay? And when one of my friends asks me, or I meet somebody from there, asks me, where do you live? I say, Victoria. But if somebody from Victoria asks me where I live, I say Sydney, right? Victoria doesn't necessarily mean the city of Victoria. It could mean the region of Victoria. You get the idea? So that's kind of what Dura is. Dura could be a specific place within the city of Babylon, or it could be any place around Babylon on the plains that surrounded it. We don't know. It's kind of ambiguous. It doesn't matter. It's big, it's up high, it's gold, it's near Babylon somewhere. Just before we kind of go any farther in this, because some people might be asking this and they'll be thinking about it all the time and might miss some of the stuff that's coming up here. Daniel's not in this story, right? Why is Daniel not in this story? Well, we'll find that out. And it has to do with the intention behind it. It could be that he's, kind of just away, or maybe he was sick that day or something. I don't know. But don't worry about it. We're going to get to where Daniel probably is. It's going to come up in a minute. Okay. Then King Nebuchadnezzar sent to gather the satraps, the prefects, the governors, the counselors, the treasurers, the judges, the magistrates, and all the officials. Okay, just from now on, we're going to shorten that sentence. The authorities, okay? Gathered the authorities. Here's what's going on here. Babylon is an empire, and Nebuchadnezzar is going out to conquer. And what he's doing is he's calling in his conquered subjects to come into the city. He's calling in the governors and the rulers of the provinces which he has conquered to come to Babylon. It's not just a general order to everybody, notice. It's an order to the rulers and the authorities of the conquered places to come to Babylon. That's what's happening. See? The magistrates and the officials of the provinces to come to the dedication of the image that King Nebuchadnezzar has set up. Verse 3. Then the people in charge, then the authorities, and the rulers of the provinces gathered for the dedication of the image that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up, and they stood before the image that Nebuchadnezzar had set up. And the herald proclaimed, "You are commanded, O peoples, nations, and languages," basically like, hey, I don't care which province you're from, which language you speak, when you hear the sound of the horn, pipe, lyre, trigon, harp, bagpipe, and every kind of music. Okay, we're just going to shorten that. When you hear the anthem, right? When you hear this anthem, this music played, you are to fall down and worship the golden image that King Nebuchadnezzar has set up. And whoever does not fall down and worship shall immediately be cast into a burning, fiery furnace. Okay, burning, fiery furnace. It's not like the furnace you have in your basement to keep your house warm, okay? It's probably more like a big brick kiln of some kind. What we do know is that it gets very hot, and it's large. It can accommodate people walking around inside it, and it must have had an opening in the top and the side. In the top, because it says that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego fell in, and then it must be in the side because then Nebuchadnezzar and his buddies, they're looking in the door at one point. So just picture like a big pit or a big walled structure or a big dome that has an opening in the top and an opening in the side. It gets very hot. Now, just back to Daniel for a second. This is why Daniel's not in this story probably. Daniel wasn't elevated to an official over the provinces at the end of Daniel chapter 2. Daniel was brought into the king's own household, right? To work in his court and live in his palace. And this whole thing is not about the Babylonians. It's not about Babylon. It's about establishing Nebuchadnezzar's authority over his conquered subjects in the provinces, of which Daniel is not one. Okay, so it's probably just, it wasn't targeted at Daniel. It was just targeted at these officials. Nebuchadnezzar wanted to establish his authority over his conquered officials. Okay. Whoever does not fall down and worship when they hear the anthem shall immediately be cast into the burning fiery furnace. Verse 7, therefore, as soon as all the peoples heard the sound of the anthem, all the peoples, nations, and languages that were there fell down and worshiped the golden image that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. Okay, so he calls in all the powers that be, all the rulers that serve under him over his provinces, and he says, okay, boys, I got this image. I'm going to play some music, and when I do, you bow to my image. Not the image of me, the image that I made. Okay, what do? Okay, sounds good. Music plays, boom, everybody's bowing to the idol. Verse 8. Therefore, at that time, certain Chaldeans, okay, this is where this comes in. Chaldeans means native Babylonians, right? They're the ones that are living in Babylon. They're not the conquered people, they're the natives. Came forward and maliciously accused the Jews. Okay, malicious means they want to do evil. Okay, notice they're not doing this because they love Nebuchadnezzar or they love his program of anthem bowing to golden statues. They're doing it because they hated the Jews. They hated the foreigners. They hated the foreigners that had been raised over them in authority, because we know that that happened at the end of chapter 2. God gave Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego authority over the provinces, it says, and then they gather all these other guys, and they're like, we don't like these guys. We don't like these foreigners being our bosses. They declared to King Nebuchadnezzar, O king, live forever. Then they kind of review the law here with, let's make sure we get this straight, king. Verse 10, you, O king, have made a decree that every man who hears the sound of the anthem shall fall down and worship the golden image. And whoever does not fall down and worship shall be cast into a burning, fiery furnace. There are certain Jews whom you've appointed over the affairs of the province of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. These men, O king, pay no attention to you. They do not serve your gods or worship the golden image that you have set up. Now, here's the thing. They're not interested in truth. They're not interested in Nebuchadnezzar's welfare. They're interested in getting rid of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And what they do is they say something's not true. Now, what do you call something that's 90% true? False, right? It's not true. True is true. Anything less than true is false. Now, what they say here, notice, they pay no attention to you. They do not serve your gods or worship the golden image that you have set up. So 2 out of 3 ain't bad. Right? It's true. They don't serve the gods of Nebuchadnezzar, and they don't worship the golden image when the anthem comes on. But that does not mean that they don't pay attention to the king, that they don't care what the king says. It's an exaggeration of their stance towards the king. Of course they pay attention to the king. They work for the king. They serve him. They serve the people on his behalf. I'm sure that they care very, very much what Nebuchadnezzar thinks and says. And these guys are like, hey, there's these Jews. They don't care at all about you. They don't care what you say. That's not true. It's not true. But they're using it to their advantage. Verse 13, then Nebuchadnezzar, in a furious rage, commanded that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego be brought. So they brought these men before the king. Nebuchadnezzar answered and said to them, is it true, O Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you do not serve my gods or worship the golden image that I have set up? Notice he doesn't even say anything about not listening to him. Verse 15, now if you are ready, when you hear the anthem, to fall down and worship the image that I have made, well and good. Everything will be fine. But if you do not worship, you shall immediately be cast into the burning fiery furnace. And who is the God that will deliver you out of my hands? Now, here's the thing. Nebuchadnezzar knows who they worship. Right? He knows their God. He did the whole thing with Daniel and Nebuchadnezzar's dream and elevated them all over to the rulership. And you're the God. Your God is the God that told me my dreams. And he's like, here though, hey, your God may be able to interpret some dreams, but he can't save you from me because I'm in charge of this land. Who is the God that will deliver you out of my hands? Verse 16. What are they going to do? Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered and said to the king, O Nebuchadnezzar, we have no need to answer you in this matter. Okay, now, I want to make sure we understand this. They're not being disrespectful in their answer to the king, okay? They're not kind of thumbing their nose and showing an attitude or contempt or anything. They call him the king. What their mean is we're not going to argue. We refuse to fight about this king. That's what we're saying. If this be so, if you're going to throw us in the furnace because we won't bow, our God whom we serve is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and he will deliver us out of your hand. Okay, now, there's a lot of debate on that particular sentence. I just think it means what it says. Somehow they knew. I don't know whether an angel told them or a prophet told. I just think they knew. Some people try to work it so that they didn't know and they were guessing, but I think from the context, they're just like, hey, we know that our God, in this particular instance, at this particular time, is going to save us from these consequences. Now, that doesn't mean all people everywhere, when they do what's right, get saved from the consequences. Okay? There's no guarantee that this is what happens every single time you stand up to tyranny. But for some reason, they're saying, we know our God is going to deliver us from you. But then this is great. They're like, hey, we're not going to argue with you. We answer to our God, and he is a higher authority than you, Nebuchadnezzar. And he is going to shortly demonstrate his authority over you in this situation. And then we read this. Verse 18. But if not, be it known to you, O king, that we will not serve your gods or worship the golden image that you set up. They're saying like, hey, king, even if God wasn't going to save our lives in this, at this moment, we'd still never bow down to your statue. We'd never bow to you or your golden image. We would sooner die than acknowledge anything or anyone as a higher authority than our God. It's not because we're going to be saved that we're saying this. We would say all of this even if we died. That's what he's saying. Well, you can imagine, old Nebi's not too happy about this. And verse 19 says, Then Nebuchadnezzar was filled with fury, and the expression of his face was changed against Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. All of a sudden, they're not the golden boys anymore. And he ordered the furnace heated 7 times more than it was usually heated. Now that's just a figure of speech for as hot as it can go is what it is. Right? 7 is the number of completion in the Bible. It's a figurative number. It just means like, turn that furnace up as hot as it's going to go. I am very angry at these guys. And he ordered, verse 20, and he ordered some of the mighty men of his army to bind Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and to cast them into the burning fiery furnace. Then these men were bound in their cloaks, their tunics, their hats, and their other garments, and were thrown into the burning fiery furnace. Because the king's order was so urgent and the furnace overheated, the flame of the fire killed those men who took up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And these 3 men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, fell bound into the burning fiery furnace. What's going on here? This king has given a law. He is the law, right? The king is the law. And there's a bunch of people who are just, okay, we'll just accept. We'll bow down to this law. And then there's this other group of people that are seizing this opportunity to promote themselves in this situation. There's political maneuvering of people trying to get themselves aggrandized and promoted. Try to put down the people that they're not agreeing with, that they don't want around. That would never happen in our day and age, right? That there would be political agendas abounding that people just acquiesced to and that other people just blindly bowed down to and followed along. That other people would seize for their own opportunity to gain in this world? No, not in our day and age. I don't know how many videos you've seen. And I'm not trying to be, I'm not. I don't have the answers. But man, it sounds a lot like the day we live in, does it not? Well, verse 24, what happens next? Then King Nebuchadnezzar was astonished and rose up in haste. He declared to his counselors, "Did we not cast 3 men bound into the fire?" And they answered and said to King, "Oh, yeah, you bet we did." But he answered and said, "But I see 4 men unbound walking in the midst of the fire, and they're not hurt. And the appearance of the 4th is like the son of the gods." Okay, the appearance of the 4th is like the son of the gods. We don't know exactly what kind of being this was. Okay, it could have been an angel. It could have been what New Testament scholars call a Christophany, which is an appearance in the Old Testament of the second person of the Trinity, a pre-incarnate appearance of our Savior Jesus Christ. Maybe. We don't know. All we know is he's pretty impressive because Nebuchadnezzar's like, wow, look at that guy. Right? And they're all walking around. He's astonished. 26. Then Nebuchadnezzar came near to the door of the burning fiery furnace. He declared, "Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, servants of the Most High God, come out and come here." Then Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came out from the fire. And the authorities gathered together and saw that the fire had not had any power over the bodies of these men. The hair of their head was not even singed, the cloaks were not harmed, and no smell of fire had even come upon them. The deliverance is so complete that they don't even smell like fire. Nebuchadnezzar answered them and said, "Blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has sent his angel to deliver his servants who trusted in him and set aside the king's command and yielded up their bodies rather than serve and worship any god except their own." Notice what's going on here. Who are the good people in this story? Who are the people that did what was right? The ones that set aside the king's command. Now, if you've ever been around here and heard me, I'm not an advocate for rebellion, and we're going to talk about that in a minute. But sometimes, and we can look back in history, the best people are the ones who set aside the commands of the authorities. You can think of one quickly. I was just watching this the other day, a documentary on the Jews in Warsaw, Poland, and how the authorities were rounding them up and getting them transported. And that was the law. If you knew of a Jew, you had to disclose that. You had to turn them in. But there were people, thankfully, that set aside the law and rescued those people and preserved their life and got them out of Poland so that they could continue to live. Again, I'm not advocating that we turn our nose, just like these guys. They're not being belligerent about it. They're not being disrespectful, but they're like, hey, we know what's right, and we're going to do what's right no matter what. Blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has sent his angels and delivered his servants who trusted in him and set aside the king's command and yielded up their bodies rather than serve and worship any god except their own God. Therefore I make a decree. Any people, nation, or language that speaks anything against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego shall be torn limb from limb and their houses laid in ruins, for there is no other God who is able to rescue in this way. Then the king promoted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the province of Babylon. Promoted. He caused to prosper more than they were before. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. That's the story. Just a couple things about this story, okay? Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and Daniel, and all the other captives lived their lives in a place that was not their home. Okay? They lived in a foreign land with foreign language, foreign religion, foreign society. Do we not find ourselves in the same place? We are a people who don't live in our home right now. Our home is yet to come. We live in a foreign country. I'm not talking about Canada or the United States. The world is a foreign country to us at the present time. Is it not? What do we do when we live in a world that is increasingly unlike our home that we're waiting for? What do we do? Well, thankfully, God wants us to know. He doesn't keep secrets from us. And there's another prophet named Jeremiah, and he's writing at this time. And he actually writes a letter to the exiles that are in Babylon, giving them these instructions. Writes a letter to the surviving exiles, the priests and the prophets, and all the people whom Nebuchadnezzar has taken to exile from Jerusalem. What's Jeremiah going to say? What's God's instructions through Jeremiah to Daniel and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and everybody else? Rebellion. You need to rise up and take control. You got to remove the authorities from their places. Armed insurrection. Get yourself some guns and get out there and start shooting people. That's what you need to do. Set up a barricade and a safe space, like clear off New Jerusalem in the middle of New Babylon. Take it over. No, of course not. That's violent. What you need to do is form a political party and start lobbying the government to change the laws. That's what you should do. Boys, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, get on Facebook and start railing against the evils of this world and railing against the perpetrators of it. No. Jeremiah writes to the exiles in Babylon this, in Jeremiah 29, "Thus says the Lord of hosts, the God of Israel, to all the exiles whom I have sent into exile from Jerusalem to Babylon. Build houses and live in them. Plant gardens and eat the produce. Take wives and have sons and daughters. Take wives for your sons and give your daughters in marriage that they may bear sons and daughters. Multiply there and don't decrease, but seek the welfare of the city where I have sent you into exile and pray to the Lord on its behalf." It's like, how mundane. Go live your life. Get married. Have kids. Prosper. Help your neighbors. Help pray for the city. Make a good society where you find yourself. Do what's right, Jeremiah says. Leave the rest to God. He'll look after it. God is more than capable of handling all the authorities of this world. Is he not? We don't need to worry about what we think the outcome of our obedience to God is going to be any more than Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego did. Proverbs 16:33 says, "The lot is cast into the lap." That just means the dice, we roll the dice, but its every decision is from the Lord. God is the determiner of outcomes, not us. He is totally capable of using the obedience of his servants to accomplish far more than we could ever imagine ourselves. In this story, in the battle of who has the power and the authority, who wins? Whose servants end up dead in this story? Not God's, right? God's servants end up unhurt, unbound, not even a scent of the wrath of Nebuchadnezzar on them. In fact, verse 30, they're promoted. Nebuchadnezzar causes them to prosper. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, through their obedience to God, go from being slandered by their enemies, under the wrath of the king, and being bound and thrown into their certain death, to being elevated by the very one who just a few minutes ago had commanded their execution. God's amazing. Like, he turns everything around. And look, the same God that these guys served, the God that entirely turned over in a moment the entire situation that they were facing, is the same God that we serve today. The same God that we call Father and love today. It's the same God. And I don't know what you're facing today or tomorrow. I don't know what we're going to face in the coming weeks and months, years maybe. But what could we possibly be afraid of in doing what he says is right and good no matter what? No matter what the level of danger we might think the situation holds, or any possible outcomes that we might imagine, who cares what we think? Our God is in charge, not us, and certainly not those who stand opposed to him. Psalm 2 is so great. Psalm 2, 2-4 says this: "The kings of the earth set themselves, and the rulers take counsel together against the Lord and against his anointed, saying, let us burst their bonds apart. Let us cast away their cords from us." They're like, hey, we need to get rid of this God who says he's got authority. Let's get away from him. We can be in charge here. Verse 4 says, "He who sits in heaven laughs." Literally, I'm amused, God says. I'm amused at their intentions, that they even think that something like this is possible. God laughs. Those who love and serve the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and our God, we have no need to worry. Just trust him and do what's right and leave the results to him. God does not call us to worry about the outcome of our good actions. That's not our job. That's his job. The existence of evil in this world is not a battle we are called or capable of winning. Okay? That victory belongs to our King and to our King alone. He alone is victorious. Thankfully, he invites us to reap the results of his victory, but we would be foolish to think that we are the victors. We are not. He is. Our call to arms in the battle against evil in this world is, first and foremost, just to fight against the evil in our own hearts. That's enough right there. At least it is for me. Right? I can't even win that battle unless God steps in on my behalf. I can't even begin to fight that battle without him. Even if, with the best of our efforts, it's not a battle that we can completely win even until God finally delivers us home from this world. We can trust that God is able to do what we are not in this world. Here's the thing. I'm going to come and sing again in a second, but I talked last week about how we're not designed for this much information. For like 99% of human history, we dealt with our own stuff, our own family, our own neighbors, our own community. Right? Even when I was a kid, it's just, you had to find the news at exactly the right time on the 3 channels on the antenna that you got, 6 o'clock if you want to watch it. Now we just have this bombardment of constant information coming, constant situations we are observing and hearing about all over the world at the click of a button anytime. We're not designed to handle that. It's overwhelming. Along those lines, can you imagine the weight in this battle of evil that God, in his great mercy and love for humanity, bears on our behalf in his patience and love? I don't know if anybody's ever seen that, something really tragic happen, Really something that just weighs on your soul. Like you see something, whether it's in the news or even in person, and just like, I can't believe the depravity of that. And how just, I can't, and it just keeps in you can't get it out of your mind. It's so heavy and so sad, and it just, you feel such sorrow for the existence of even one example in that. Most of us haven't even had one thing happen to us like that or observe one thing like that. There are people that have seen lots. And if we who are sinful can feel such great heaviness for even a small amount of tragedy and evil in this world, can you imagine the weight that our holy God bears for us as he hears and sees every instance of unimaginable pain and suffering that is occurring every second of every day, everywhere on this earth, and he knows and he feels it all, and yet the amount of crying out for relief from that pain in this world, and the crying out for justice to be brought to bear on the evil. But our God is so awesome in his great patience and his long suffering. He holds it all. And it does not sway him one iota from his desire to give grace and mercy and forgiveness to any and all who will turn from their sin and call out to him to be saved. He is able. We are not. How do we live in a world that is increasingly unlike our home? Peter says it, 1 Peter. Finally, all of you have unity of mind, sympathy, brotherly love, a tender heart, and a humble mind. Don't repay evil for evil or reviling for reviling, but on the contrary, bless. For this you were called, that you may obtain a blessing. For whoever desires to love life and to see good days, let him just keep his tongue from evil and his lips from speaking deceit. Let him turn away from evil and do good. Let him seek peace and pursue it. For the eyes of the Lord are on the righteous, and his ears are open to their prayer. Simple, straightforward, not complicated. He goes on to say, Now, who is there to harm you if you are zealous for what's good? We have a God who's asking, if we obey God, who can hurt us? But even if you should suffer for righteousness' sake, Peter says, you'll be blessed. Have no fear of them, nor be troubled. For in your hearts, honor Christ the Lord as holy, always being prepared to make a defense to anyone who asks for a reason for the hope that is in you. Yet do it with gentleness and respect. Just go about our lives the way God has designed them to be lived, and trust in him that he will work it all out for our good and his glory. Look, the gods of this present darkness, the principalities and powers of the air, as Paul calls them, are arrayed against God and his Son and our King, and we do stand firmly opposed to them. And when we do have an opportunity to speak, we speak up. But the people in this fallen world around us, we cannot get this confused. The people in this fallen world around us are not our enemies. They are the captives of our enemies. And we ought to be willing to give our lives to set them free. Our King is coming. And it's his life that's important. And it's his victory that's important. And this is his story, not ours. It's not our righteousness that makes the difference. It's his. It's not our faithfulness that makes the difference. It's his. All that we have and all that we're going to have belong to him. It's not our war to win. It's his. It's not our weight to bear in this world. The victory comes from his hand and his hand alone, because it's not my blood, it's not me that defends me. It's his. It's his blood that delivers me eternally to his glorious kingdom. It's his blood that defends me in this world. His victory is assured, and it belongs only to him. And one day we will gather together with our brothers and sisters, all who call him Lord, all who proclaim his kingship before he comes, and we will crown him King of Kings and Lord of Lords and worship him forever. What a great day that'll be.